basis. Today we are doing kit 160A, and Madeline, Tim, thank you for joining us from respectively New Mexico and Michigan. And without further ado, Maddie, I'm going to hand it off to you because you always are in my baseball things. We're in hot stove mode right now, but we're always talking baseball. You are the leadoff hitter,
and this is a good thing.
This is a good
thing. If I do a good job, yes.
Absolutely. Line one is yours.
I will say that I don't want to belong to any alternative universe where you are not considered competent, Evan. You know, not to mention your exuberant enthusiasms are fantastic for all of us. So, hi everybody. I'm picking up wine number one. I'm actually going to pour a little bit more in my glass to sort of wake it up. I did nose it a little while ago, but I intentionally don't like tasting it with too much thought before I'm tasting with you. And for those of you who are new to this game, and it's very relaxed and very safe, we like to put up questions to consider as we're considering the wine and before we reveal it. So the three buttons that I put up for you to hold in the front or the back of your mind is non-fruit aromas, which I've learned from my friend Tim is wildly important. But particularly in this case, there's one element up there that I think will speak to you. How would you both quantify and qualify the acidity and the texture of this wine? So quantify to me means, you know, medium plus high, and qualify is tart, lean, round. You're describing the texture if you prefer the mouthfeel. And then finally, is there indeed an impression of inorganic earth, whether you want to call it minerality, whetstone, sea breeze, river rock, something like that? So hold that thought. I'm picking up wine number one, and Evan already showed you white surface on an angle. Make an effort not to dump it on your laptop, Madeline. That would be good. And all of a sudden, it's not just white. It is really, I think a light yellow in my glass with a little green glint in it. And to remind us all, green is telegraphing youth in white wine. We're not making up our mind about anything. I love quoting my friend Tim. There's a part of us, the minute we touch the glass, that is desperate to know what it is. We're going to part that desperation in the corner over there and tell it to be quiet for a moment. So we're going to release the fragrance by either just turning the glass or whirling it. And I will tell you, the look is how it moves in the glass. It has, you know, moderate viscosity. It tears, you know, not slowly and thickly, and it doesn't sheet. So it's giving us an indication of some extract and also probably moderate alcohol. And we're not drawing conclusions. And just to remind us, we decided on I did, and a pale yellow with green glints. By the way, and that's why the chat room was invented. You are encouraged to disagree with us if you prefer. So aromatically, this meets me out of the glass, actually. I barely get close to it, and there it is. And it is a beautiful expression of very clean, pure white tree fruit. On the green side, like green apple, green pear, a little bit underripe, maybe some stone fruit, but like white peach. You know, there's something crunchy about the aromatic. And also the citrus is very apparent and enthusiastic. I'm going to work that word today, I can tell. I like enthusiasms. And it's in the form of, you know, true lemon, not sweet lemon, not like Meyer lemon, and maybe key lime, that beautiful ripe tartness. And we'll see on the palate if we can perceive a little bit of zest or peel or oil to it. Anything else aromatically? You know, tropical fruit, maybe a little bit of kiwi. We're working the tart factor. Floral for sure. Citrus blossom, lemon blossom, lime blossom. It's not, you know, driving the aromatic of the wine, but it's in there just in tandem with, you know, the expressive citrus fruit. It's really forward nose, but it's not, it doesn't have a pushy component. The evidence is in the tree fruit and in the citrus, but in an integrated, albeit very clean, clear way. It's not hard to get it. And right on the heels of those, there is big time salty minerality. I just feel I'm not on the shore of Lake Michigan. I think I'm more on the Atlantic, or channeling my childhood on the seashore of the Mediterranean, where you get this fresh, salty character. It is ripe fruit, but tart fruit. And there is another aspect here. I think there is an evident Lees expression, however you want to define it. I'm pretty simple in how I define Lees, yeasty, and it's giving a richness to the aromatics. I don't perceive oak character, but I'm curious on the palate if there has been some neutral oak that relaxes the wine. So I'm taking it on the palate. And I'm from the elder school, where I love to make noise when I pull air into my mouth and connect my sense of smell to my sense of taste. The acidity is, quite poignant. I can't say it's a surprise, but it's very pleasant and it's eye-opening. I would qualify the acidity immediately as either medium plus plus, or frankly high. It is very mouth-watering. That saltiness that I smelled is on the palate absolutely as well. It's almost like this is the vegan vegetarian talking, eating an oyster. But I've only done it once. It was not a pleasant experience. I'm just telling all y'all. I'm going to immediately take another taste because the acidity is so compelling. I want to neutralize it a little bit by repetition. The fruit, there it is. But I think on the palate, citrus leads, tart lime, tart lemon, ripe and tart. And then on its heels, the tart tree fruit. So green apple and slightly unripe pear, a little bit of white peach, all the stuff that we smelled. There's a floral aspect on the palate, but there's also a little green element. It's kind of neat, like green and salty, like capers or celery. And I'm reaching a little bit and getting, moderately precious, but it's there. In terms of any oak influence, there may be some, but it is neutral. There's no oak flavor whatsoever, but the wine is pretty relaxed and open on the nose, albeit young wine. And on the palate, the acidity dominates the mouthfeel. So it is tart and lean, but mid-palate, there's a richness to the fruit. And I think it might have either been barrel fermented or barrel aged in very neutral oak. Lees, hello, there it is, especially mid-palate. There's a richness that's born of, frankly, extract, quality of fruit, possibly older vines. And I'm one of the people that buys into that. And that's it. So tart fruit, lees, mineral presence, saline-like, high acidity, a little bit of a floral aspect, some green veggie elements, but modest players, and citrus. It's long, by the way. It is long and palate cleansing, high quality. Mm-hmm. So on the non-fruit, for me, lees leads. Texture is tart and cleansing, and inorganic earth, big time.
And I just have one quick question, and maybe it's just me, and sometimes I get up on that side of the bed and it is just me. I got a little bit of spritz. I don't know if you got any prickle on your tongue.
I didn't, but there's an illusion of it because the acidity is so poignant.
Okay.
I didn't, a little bitterness on the finish. There could be a touch of phenolic, but I don't think it's a strong element in this wine.
Yeah. Okay.
But with white wine these days, one could make the case that it's the rare young winemaker, especially, that's not doing some sort of skin contact at some point in time.
Absolutely. Okay. So, as many of you know, from here we then go into sort of it is a blind tasting. So how we're going to go about it, there's always several grapes and an other category. several regions. And in other category, the other category could be used for voting for something that simply says, I don't believe that any of the presented choices there are correct. In my mind's eye, I think it's something different. If you do, please, again, this is a very safe space, as they say. Go ahead and put it in chat so we can talk about it. Chances are that those are always great ways to facilitate original dialogue, and more organic dialogue within the content.
And frankly, you really help each other, and it is, it's, by the way, the poll is anonymous when we get to the poll, and that's
Yep.
going to pop up. But let's look at what we're considering. We have two, what I would call, and please vote with enthusiasm, not often, but do vote. Chardonnay and Melon de Bourgogne fall into categories that we would describe as more neutral, not highly aromatic, if at all, and they take their aromatic expressions from where they're grown and how they're handled, and how old they are. Alvarinho, in the other Iberian country, has a definitive floral expression, so you get to decide whether it leads in this wine or not. Chardonnay can certainly be made with or without oak. Alvarinho rarely, some of the more I don't know, forward-thinking, expensive producers of Alvarinho are putting it in barrel and even a little bit of new. I don't get it, but whatever makes them happy. And then Melon de Bourgogne, if it has oak on it, and we're talking Muscadet, neutral oak, not new that I know of, though, things keep changing. France and Spain for obvious choices, Chardonnay, Alvarinho, Melon. Australia and California for, well, definitely Chardonnay. The other two, I don't know as Milan travels much. Alvarinho has begun to. So I always get the aisle seat in business class. Tim and Evan can sit anywhere in the plane that they like.
We didn't get the upgrades.
And aisle seat for me, yes. How are we doing on the poll, Silka? Are people voting?
Ending 5, 4, 3, 2, and 1. And I think it's going to pop right up. There you go.
Oh, excellent. So a hat tip to Chardonnay, but a modest one, running almost equal between Alvarinho and Melon de Bourgogne. So between France and Spain, we are definitively in, I still use the term old world, AKA not Europe. There's only so much conditioning I can deprogram in myself, and it's not hurting anybody. So in answer to that, and I think I already said it, both Alvarinho and Melon have at least medium plus acidity, sometimes higher. Melon can have a floral component, but it's a driver, an essential part of Alvarinho. Chardonnay, takes its character from whatever it wants to be. I mean, I think the only thing we could consider here possibly, because of the mouthfeel and the expression, is, Chablis or perhaps Mâconnais, though I don't think it's rounded enough for that. So,
yep. All right, onto the airplane.
I didn't do too bad in terms of time. I usually drag my feet on wine number 1, but I'm nudging myself. Here we go. We're leaving Evan's house. Yay. Can't wait for the kitty to appear. We are going to, and I'll start talking about the result even before we get there, but we are going to Europe. We are not going to Spain. We are going to France. We are going to the Loire Valley. We're going specifically to the Vin du Pays Nantais. So we're at the mouth of the Loire. And we are in Muscadet, specifically Muscadet, Sèvres, and Maine. And just to remind us all, I often think when I'm describing these things that you probably know more than I do because you have, you're actively studying, right? You're excellent walking, talking little resource people. This is family owned and operated, estate that's been around for 200 years and went from like 1 hectare to 40 over that period of time. So just to reiterate, you have the large areas of Vin du Pays Nantais. Within that, there are 4 Muscadet appellations, just Muscadet. Muscadet Sèvres Maine is the most famous and accounts for about 2/3 to 3/4 of production, and it takes its name from 2 rivers, Sèvres and Maine. Above it, we've got Muscadet Coteaux de la Loire that I don't see much in my market. And in the southwest, you've got Muscadet Côte de Grandlieu, which I've never seen in my market, but there you have it. The only grape variety we're talking about is Milan, though evidently with straight Muscadet, something like 10% Chardonnay is allowable for whatever it's worth. This mentions specifically Sur-Lie, which isn't on is generally on most, if not all, bottles of Sevres Men. I'm catching a comment here that I can absolutely see why you think that, Jerry, that the bouquet was very forward. This is a particularly expressive Muscadet, and I'm thrilled to see it. A couple of generalities for the moment. This is young. We'd accept 223 or 2022, depending on where you were going. Domaine de Quatre Routes is one of 4 properties that the Poiron family owns in the Muscadet Sevres MN appellation. And so this is a state bottle. It's seen about 6 months on the lees. It has indeed been fermented in old oak, and it is aged for 6 months specifically. Family estate, right? Isn't that beautiful? Let's go. Yay. It's been aged in glass-coated tanks, so quite neutral for 8 months. I'm sorry, for 6 months prior to bottling. Alcohol is modest, and I didn't mention alcohol actually in describing the structure. My bad. It's 12%. What else to tell you about this? They talk about lees specifically at this estate, and I want to read this because this is actually Janssis's definition of autolysis of autolytic character. It's the destruction of internal structure of cells by their own enzymes. And this comes into play big time, and we use that term with champagne, right? But with still wines, particularly something that's expressing itself as Sur-Lie, the mouthfeel is changed and often improved, and the flavors tend to come more forward. And there is indeed, and you can see this biscuity, bready, complex character. Milan, by the way, was called de Bourgogne because way back when, we're talking 1400s, it was an old Burgundy variety that was declared illegal in Burgundy. It came up to the Val de Loire, where it became known as Milan, possibly because of its rounded leaves looking like melons. And Muscadet came up as a region, possibly because of a musky character. The lovely Dutch traders were using this grape to make wine to distill, and they would flavor their distillate with musky components. It's a grape that's very resistant to frost. It doesn't mind the cool climate, so it likes the Atlantic. And I like how, who is this? This is Monsieur Poiron. He and his family have inched toward the modern expression of Muscadet, meaning lees stirring, not just lees contact, skin contact. So whoever picked up phenolic, bravo, I'd forgotten about that, and barrel fermentation in neutral oak. And they actually own one of the crus. These came into play in 2011. They're not single vineyards per se, they're communes that are considered cru, and there's several that have been named. And the takeaway from those is even longer aging on lees, to the point where some of them can't put Sur-Lie on the bottle because it exceeds the legality and age-worthy. Neat stuff, isn't it?
Yeah.
By the way, those of you who are flipping out and wondering in terms of testable varieties, et cetera, don't worry about it. This is a discovery wine in this set, and I'm always so pleased that Evan includes these, because this is a great expression of modern high-quality Muscadet that we should know about. I mean, I really have been turned off to the category most of my professional life until quite recently. So thank you, Evan.
You're welcome. No, this is a wine that for years, back when we were all learning about wine, Tim, Madeline, and myself, that was just sort of, it was like the bastard child. It's like, yeah, it goes with oysters, but it has no other redeeming social value. And the wines used to be leaner, meaner, and just, not much going on. But there's this whole modern expression that Madeline alludes to of people who are taking this grape seriously, who are looking at the wines in a different light, through a different prism, and making wines that are downright interesting and downright more complex and downright age worthy. And if there's something that I would recommend to everybody, is find some good Muscadet producers and put those bottles of wine in your cellar. Forget about them for about 5 to 8 years and bring them out, and you will be rewarded, sort of like the whole bottle and berry philosophy of Australian rather, Semillon, where you sort of buy it, forget about it, bring it out about 5 or 6 years later, and are always rewarded. So great. Thank you, Madeline. Well, I'm going to hop into wine too. And you know the drill, hold it up against your white background and let's take a look at this wine. If you look at it side by side, the beauty of having wine two is you can always look at it against wine one, is that the wine doesn't have the same depth of color, it doesn't have the same richness of color. It's the first wine had more of a true sort of yellow, almost a yellowish tint to them. This one is definitely more in that straw vein of things, maybe a little deeper in straw, but nevertheless straw. There too, like the first wine, is a bit of green hint, which once again, as a reminder, is always about either cooler climate, cooler vintage, or no oak, or no skin contact. Those would be all the ways you would get exacerbated pigmentation out of a white wine. When I swirl this wine around and look at it, or simply roll it around in my glass, it's what I would say moderate. You know, it's not tearing slow, but it's certainly not tearing quickly. So it sort of fits in that moderate thing, and there's nothing doing the backstroke or the breaststroke in my glass, so I'm not concerned in that regard. And I'm just going to go take it right on the nose and see what we got. So I am always, as many of you know, looking for a few terms in my wine to talk about, few standing for fruit, for earth, and for wood, sort of the three primary building blocks on which most wines are constructed, and always looking to see which one drives it. In a so-called European wine, an old world wine, if you will, those oftentimes are driven by the characteristics of earth, both organic and inorganic, and in places that are outside of Europe and tend to be a little bit warmer in climate, tends to be more fruit driven. So I always ask myself that right off the bat here. And whereas the first wine was really all about the stoniness, that salinity that Madeline talked about, and sort of an inorganic earth character and leaves, this one is clearly about fruit. And I get a ton of fruit here. It's very much in that tree vein of fruit. So it's apples, and it's a lot of them. Sort of some green, but mostly yellow and golden apples. There's pears, both on the sort of brown side, yellow side, ripe green side. And then there's a little bit almost of that like Asian pear or other elements there. Dare I say it, cherimoya, like custard apples and things like that. There's a soft peachiness, or maybe a little bit of nectarine. There's a lot of white florals in here, which sort of suggests both combinations of, I don't know if we'd call them elderflower, but sort of sweet citrus and just beautiful floral components. There is almost a kind of like a candied ginger element to the wine. There's some chamomile, there's some verbena, and then there's just sort of an overall roundness, an overall richness, which again, I think is probably, as Madeline so eloquently articulated before, about some lees contact in there, which is a little bit sort of rich, a little bit sort of biscuity, dare I say, in its own way. But let's go ahead and taste it and see where we fall out. Notice I didn't say wood, which is my third term, because wood, if it's there, is either larger, older, or again, neutral in the context of this wine. As far as earth goes, I'm not picking up much. Maybe there's a little bit of potting soil. There's certainly no what I would call minerality to this wine. It really is driven by its pronounced fruit character. I'm picking up a little bit of melon now that I go back to it the second time around. I'm picking up a little bit more soft, underripe tropical character, or actually I should say probably just ripe, but again, more in that sort of kiwi vein, maybe a little bit more guava-esque, not something as pronounced and expressive as mango and or pineapple. There is a nuttiness to this wine, but it's more textural. I'm thinking about like chewing on macadamia nuts or pine nuts that leave this sort of waxy component in your mouth, which suggests to me possibly there is, again, maybe some oak there, or again, rich skin, rather lees contact, which would provide that. I would say the acid is probably medium plus, maybe pushing high. Say the alcohol is very moderate. My chest cavity is kind of meh, as they would say on a New York Times book review, and the length is very present. It is subtle, but it is very present, and it's staying with me. So I think the wine is a higher quality wine. I think it's a fruit-driven style of wine, driven primarily by ripe tree fruits, a little bit of orchard fruit, and a nuance, or another Madeline term, a soupçon, if you will, a scotch, if you will,
A
of
skosh.
tropicality. and not much, really just a pure and also very much a monovarietal expression. Some wines we'll talk about later on are clearly blends. This is clearly the expression of a single variety. So hang on to all of that. Her character, just to quickly relook at our questions. Ripe, fresh to ripe, but ripe and definitely not overripe. Non-fruit components, a little bit of the nuttiness, but it really is all about the fruit. And what does the texture suggest? There is a roundness and a creaminess to it, which is possibly variety, possibly ripeness and or alcohol, or possibly some barrel aging. And we'll see over time. So with that, let's take a look at what our choices could be. We've got a couple. We've got our ubiquitous Chardonnay, and Chardonnay can indeed take on the interpretation of what a winemaker wants to do. So be that low played oak, be that lees contact, be that a number of other things. You can play that up or play that down. It is the large slab of marble in seek of a statue when it's being conceived. Viognier, generally very expressive, usually a lot of ripe sort of orchardy fruit in the veins of stone fruits and things like that. Not sure if we're getting that here. Pinot Gris or Grigio, as the name sort of suggests, oftentimes is both where the grape is from and how it's interpreted. Grigio being sort of more in that Italianate vein, and Gris versus more in the Alsace vein. Appropriate spots both in Europe and outside of Europe of where all of those could be done. And with the exception of perhaps Viognier in Italy, all of those grapes are done in all of those places. But if you think it could be another place, that could be important today. Not telling you which wine could be important. We'll see. Anyway, so with that, vote early. Don't vote too often, but just vote once, but at least vote. I think you should be in good shape with this after having done it just a couple of weeks ago, and we will take a look at what we could be and what we could have. Any pre-comment before we hop on the plane, Tim, Madeline?
Yeah, not really. I think you nailed it. It's got a lot of fruit. It's got a little bit of phenolics. The acid's a little elevated. I think monovarietal is a good description.
There's a simplicity to this wine.
Yeah.
That I don't mean that as a character flaw. It just is. It's not giving us, multiple layers at this point in time. Maybe it will.
Great. So with that, let's leave where we were and say goodbye to our friends in the Western Loire Valley. By the way, a beautiful place to go. Oh, sorry. Oh, everyone's in Pinot Gris land. Boom, boom, boom. Gris, Grigio, etc. Couple of votes for Chardonnay, no votes for the usually expressive Viognier, and no others. So what's interesting here is we look across the regions, we're kind of all over the place. And I think that's actually a spot-on observation when it comes to this wine, and we'll talk about it a little bit. There are styles of Pinot Gris that could be interpreted in many ways. So, Jerry, I'm ruling out the Viognier, not so much because of the acidity, but really more of just the expressiveness of florality and of stone fruits like peaches and nectarines. So we're saying goodbye to the Western Loire, a beautiful place if you like that part of the world and you like the coast and you like oysters and seafood and plateau de fruits de mer and all that. And we are staying in the Northern Hemisphere and we're simply hopping back over the Atlantic. So we went from one side of the country over the Atlantic back. Now we're hopping back and now we're coming kind of near we were in San Francisco, but I got to catch a very long walk or a flight to get up there. And we are going to Oregon. And we are going to the area of Newburgh, but really deep in the heart of the Willamette Valley. And we're going to visit up with the fabulous, lovely couple of Scott and Annie Schul, who own Raptor Ridge Winery. And Raptor Ridge does not have like dinosaurs and stuff on it and all that. So it's really just a cool name for a winery. It was established back in 1995. It does sit specifically in the Newburgh area. But Scott Schul was an enthusiast coming out of the tech industry, loved wine, got into it, started home winemaking, and the rest, as they say, is history. He is assisted and supported by his wife, Annie, who was both at the time his work partner in tech, is still his work partner in wine, and a small team. They started literally not out of a garage, but out of a barn, if you will. So I think maybe the Raptors have more to do with the Raptors of I don't know, maybe hanging out in barns. Who knows? But anyway, they've done a lovely job. They established their winery in 2007, and it's really based on this particular vineyard, the Tuskegee Vineyard, which sits in the Chehalem Hills Mountains rather, is a 27-acre single estate property, just a beautiful thing, but it's augmented. So they're not actually in where this vineyard is. You know, there's stuff there, but the winery moved, if you will, off this property and is now in Newburgh. They source from 8 different vineyards. They're probably most known, in all honesty, for their Pinot Noir, but I've always thought their white wines are great and underrated. The Pinot Gris being sort of very emblematic wine for them. And they make a killer, for those of you who are looking for uber geeky wines, they make a really good Auxerrois, which is another Alsace variety, which you rarely see outside of Alsace.
Michigan, Northern Michigan.
Okay, there you go. Auxerrois of
Yeah.
Northern Michigan. Maybe that'll be a wine in a kit one day.
Oh.
But anyway, so what's interesting about this, I want to go back quickly before turning it over to Tim with what's interesting here. When you talk about Pinot Gris / Grigio, you're actually literally ending up in one of 3 places. So Italian Pinot Grigios tend to be bright, liquid electricity. Sometimes when they're poorly made, kind of lemon water. When they're well made, a little bit of bright acid, minerality, etc., and can be just delightful wines when handled, I should say, by the right people. Then there's the people in Alsace who are making these thick, almost at times unctuous, and oftentimes slightly off dry versions of Pinot Gris, and they're called Pinot Gris. And then there's what we call the tweeners, and the tweeners you see in other part of the world that have 1 foot in each camp. So in this case, you have the camp of the acid that you would find in the Italianate versions, but you've got the texture, if you will, of something that's more Alsace. When you end up in the middle, literally there is something called the Oregonian style of Pinot Gris, and this is the Oregonian style of Pinot Gris. It's a handful of people doing it in California as well. I'm thinking McMurray Ranch and a couple of others, but it's very much a good style. It's fun with food. It's a beautiful cocktail wine or appetizer wine too, as you're sitting off your deck staring into that beautiful area around the Chehalem Mountains, and just a fun little wine. There's Scott.
Did you see Sarah's comment about Australian Pinot Gris? Sorry to interrupt the
No, I
introduction
didn't,
to
because I'm not as
Scott.
coordinated as you as doing chats and stuff at the same time. So no, I haven't had as many Australian Pinot
Neither have
Gris
I.
in all
Neither have I.
candor to make that. I've had some New Zealand Pinot Gris, particularly out of Marlborough, and a couple of out of Otago. The Otago ones tend to be sort of on the leaner Oregon style, and those coming from Marlborough are very akin to what you find coming out of Oregon texturally, fruit expression, etc. Again, without any real traces of minerality. Scott still looks like about the same as I saw him when he opened this winery back in the day, and he's just a lovely man making some really cool wine. So there you go. Oregonian Pinot Gris, I think a really good example of that. So whereas the first wine is Discovery, this is kind of a wine you should know. It really does speak to what they're doing up there, and Scott's a great advocate for the variety and a great protagonist of a classic style. So with that, onwards, Tim. Take
Thank
us
you,
to
Evan.
wine 3.
Yeah, hey everybody. Let's take a look at these questions first. So first up, about the color, asking what does the color of the wine suggest in regards to the grape variety, origin, or winemaking techniques. Next, really important in this wine, pay attention to the ripeness level of fruit and connect that to the level of alcohol, because the two go hand in hand. One is the cause to the effect. And then finally, how would you describe the structural levels? First the alcohol, but also the acid in regards to alcohol. And finally, the level of tannin, especially the level of tannin given your expectations of how much color is in the glass, okay? A lot to consider, so let's get started. First of all, we're going to do the Evan thing. We're going to check it out against a white background. Yeah, do we do that? Okay, so notice it's got a lot of color. So it's, I would say, deep ruby with some purple in it, maybe opaque because I can't read through it. And what else about it? It doesn't reflect any light, the tears legs, etc. Well, my glass is on vacation. Okay, so it's high, right? And your expectations are elevated alcohol, residual sugar, maybe, we'll see, maybe alcohol. And also, just given the color, it stains the glass. Not a mystery, right? A lot of depth of color, seriously pigmented grapes involved in making the wine. Okay, let's get to the nose. And my goodness, there's a lot going on here. Okay, so The first thing that hits me, and I'm gonna stick to the script, but just there's several things hitting in rapid succession. First of all, alcohol. I feel heat immediately. Second of all, raisinated fruit, which explains the alcohol. And then third, there's some volatile acidity. So everybody, if you put your nose in the glass, it smells like balsamic vinegar, and that's VA. That's Acetobacter. And of course, you might be tempted to say, oh, that's kind of a fault, but it's not. It's all about context. So that would speak to winemaking. Maybe the wine's been an extended period of time in larger oak, which will give you, a very gentle form of oxidation, which could result in VA, or its fermentation temperature being warm, or any number of different things. But there's definitely some VA here, and alcohol and raisinated fruit, which, connects to the color. All right, so now the specifics. Fruit-wise, there's kind of three things going on. We've got some red fruit, black fruit, and some dried fruit. Red fruit is really ripe. It's kind of being cherry-ish and plums. And these are dried and raisinated and almost overripe. The black fruit is pretty much the same. There's black plums, there's black cherries, there's blackberries. But again, it is ripe, overripe, and dried and stewed. Again, so that means grapes that are really, really ripe or even beyond, and we'll explore that in a second. There's also dried fruit. So there's prunes, there's raisins, and there's sultanas in here. Okay, so we've got a wine made from really ripe fruit or something else entirely, okay? Non-fruit. There's some, I would say floral. This kind of dried rose petals, maybe a little dried jasmine. There's definitely some green elements here, some herbal elements. There's like kind of dried leafy greens, for lack of a better way to put it. There's sun-dried tomatoes, maybe a little paprika, definitely some mushrooms. This wine is earthy, but I'm going to make sure I get everything before I go to that. There's some bergamot. There's some like black tea and some tobacco leaf, like tobacco. And now that we get to the earth, well, there's leather, there's turned soil, there's mushroom, as I mentioned, and there's some mineral or stony type earth. And then there's the leather, and then there is oak here. It seems to be larger, more oxidative oak. And I get that from kind of a marzipan, bitter walnut kind of a thing going. And then I mentioned, if we had to quibble about winemaking choices here, there's a little oxidation and there's a little VA. So this, again, speaks to a couple of things. Number one, the ripeness level of the grapes at harvest, but number two, the wine having spent extended time in larger cooperage. Okay, with that, everyone taste it, please. Okay, wow. So if I say, oh, and inhale, I get heat all the way down here. So the alcohol is high. And the fruit is raisinated and it's almost bitter, right? Yeah, that's very interesting. Okay, I think some winemaking choices come into play here. Does the wine change much from nose to palate? The fruit tartans up a little bit. We got craisins now, like dried cranberry. It's almost like fruit leather you give your kids in lunch. So there's the pruny, plummy, raisiny, but there's almost an amaro, like Braulio or Fernet quality to it in the finish that's bitter. So it's very herbal. And the herbal qualities like tea, like even rosemary, tobacco, chicory. Chicory is a good call because chicory is bitter. And black licorice, yeah. And then I want to taste it again because I want to check the earth and the oak and the mineral out. All right, this complex wine, a lot going on. So it's more minerally than it was on the nose. It is profoundly earthy, mushroomy, like soily, loam. Definitely some oak, and the oak frames the finish. And it is larger oak, but it definitely has seen quite a bit of time in it. It's more toast and smoke than spice, but it definitely is textural. You can really feel it. The acid is higher than you think it would be, and we're talking raisinated fruit, so you wouldn't think that acid would be a thing, but it is. The acid is at least medium plus. As I said, the alcohol is high. But interestingly enough, for wine with this much tannin and extract, there's not a lot of tannin here. That's very curious to me, okay? Because I was expecting somewhere on 6, 7, 8 on a scale of 10 of tannin, and it's not there, okay? The wine has a very long and persistent finish, and it's complex. Yeah, how about that? That's really something. Okay, with that, why don't we go to our poll and see our choices? We have Corvina blend, which is from Northeast Italy. We have Malbec blend from Argentina and Mendoza. And then we have Zinfandel blend. And at least two of those three would explain the alcohol and the ripeness level. Your choices of places would be Italy for the Corvina blend, France for the Malbec blend in terms of Cahors, and Argentina, Malbec also, and then finally California for Zinfandel, or even Malbec for that matter, but usually Zinfandel. So everybody, there are your choices. As Evan would say, vote early, but not often. And tell us what you think. And if you think it's over, absolutely go for it. Okay?
Tim, do you get residual sugar on the palate, and do you think the acid's adjusted? If you don't
No,
mind
the acid is definitely not adjusted to me because there are underripe kinds of fruit that are dry. Somebody said you get a lot of tannin. Okay, if you get a lot of tannin, I want you to think of Barolo. Okay, so Barolo's like barking pit bull behind fence, you know. And man, I'm not getting that. I'm expecting more tannin. There's oak spice, baking spice. I'm looking at everybody's comments. Yeah, Thomas Carboni, Fernet Branca. Yeah, but Thomas, you know, I'm going to go more Braulio here, something a little bit more elegant. I mean, Fernet's not subtle. Let's face it. Okay. Okay. All right. So everybody, let's, I guess, close it off, Evan, if we want to.
Yeah, absolutely.
Ooh,
And it
look
looks
at that.
like
Everybody went Corvina blend.
everyone went Corvina.
Okay.
Interesting. And clearly the votes correlate to the Italian, a couple of France, one in California,
Yeah.
maybe. But yeah,
Maybe the Amaro comment was a little too subtle.
Yeah. Well, there's California vermouths these days too. You know, people are doing things like that. The one thing that was interestingly and curious too is I was just going back to Madeline's comment. At least to me, there does seem to be this thing of actual sweetness in the wine. I think to your point, there's acid there to cut all the way through it, but there is sort of, we've always talked about sugar lingering in the mouth, and I'm getting linger, right? Am I?
For me, yes, I'd almost say fruitier on the finish than unexpected, but there's definitely some residual sugar in that. And thanks, I somehow glossed over that. Yeah, good point. All right, so everybody, let's hop on Evan's Kush jet, and we're going to go.
One day I want a real jet. Yeah,
you know.
Good luck with that, Evan.
Okay, so we are going to do an overnighter again. So we're going to need champagne, and then we'll need coffee in the morning because you've got to balance stimulants and depressants. And we ended up in a pretty cool place. So we are going to Italy. A lot of people were right on that one. And we're going to basically up near Venice. And we're going to Zenato. And Zenato as a winery, you know, it's been around since 1960. And that's Sergio and his wife Carla, who founded the winery in 1960. The winery itself is about 15 miles from Lago di Garda, or Lake Garda, beautiful lake. And initially, the winery specialized in Trebbiano. There's a clone of Trebbiano called Lugana, almost spit it out. And that's probably the richest form of Trebbiano in Italy there is. And it's also a wine I look for when I'm in the shop. But, you know, in time, they branched out and went to Valpolicella and started to farm vineyards there, and also started to make Amarone. And this wine is called Ripassa. So this is a Valpolicella legally, technically. But what they do is they re-ferment the wine on the leaves of Amarone. So you've got grapes that have been raisinated. They make the wine, and there's the leaves and stems that are left over, and then they re-ferment young Valpolicella on it, and it raises the alcohol percentage by about point and a half. Adds a little bit of residual sugar that many of you found, and then adds a really compoted, stewed, very complex quality to the wine. But not only that, that's where that VA is from. Yeah. So this is really wonderful stuff. Very complex. Very layered. That is their estate in Valpolicella. And those are Corvina grapes, probably. The blend here is 85% Corvina Veronese. You got a little bit of Rondinella, and then about 10% Oceletta, which is another indigenous grape to the area. And initially, this, after going through secondary fermentation, goes through malolactic in tank. They'll keep it there for 6 months, and then put it in large, what are called tonneaux. They're about 1,000-liter French barrels and Slavonian barrels. Leave it there for 18 months, put it in bottle, keep it there for 6 months. So by the time you get it, it's at least 2 years old. And, it's really complex. I think it's also one of the better values for a wine of this style.
Mhm. What a richness. I think this would be
Yes.
so useful in a dining room, particularly if, you wanted to give people an alternative that was rich and opaque and mouth-filling and without any, foreign aromas and flavors. There's nothing odd about this. And I think that people love that jamminess and driedness and, and dried floral quality also. It's delicious, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, it sure is. It
Perfect
sure
wine
is.
to go with Raisinets.
Yes. And there is Alberto.
Barbecue.
Did you say Raisinets, really?
Yeah, I was just joking.
Yes. Okay. That makes me think of Blazing Saddles, Evan. Okay. There is Alberto, who's the winemaker now. Nadia, who's the daughter of Sergio and Carla, pretty much handles the business end, but he handles viticulture and winemaking. There's another family who's also done a lot for how Amarone is produced. They've really modernized it. And if you ever get a chance to try one of their Amarones, you absolutely should. Somebody said bad toupee, Bill, cruel.
It's not a toupee. Look, I was admiring it as an
It's got-
ex-Ann Arbor hippie.
I was going to say it's very 70s. Yes.
Mhm.
Yeah. Okay. All right. That was delicious wine.
Yeah.
Mhm.
And we're going to go to wine number 4 now, everybody. So before taking a look, here are your questions. How do you describe the fruit qualities in this wine? Red, blue, black, or dried, or is a combination? And that in itself is a key to the wine. What are the important non-fruit aromas and flavors? That's a question I always ask about any wine because so many of the impact compounds that are important to help identify a grape or a wine are non-fruit aromas and flavors. And then finally, how would you describe the texture and the quality of the tannins? And to me, that speaks to the grape variety, but also winemaking as well. So everybody, let's take a look. And we'll get our white background and we'll hold the wine up. And only to say is this too, like wine number 3, is very deep in color, almost opaque. And I would call this a very youthful ruby with a tinge of purple. It lightens up to a lighter pinkish purple fuchsia rim. Yeah. So the wine, I think, is fairly young, maybe 2 to 3 years old. All right. So let's check out the tears and legs. If we do that. And unlike the last wine where the viscosity, if you want to call it that, was high, this is medium plus. So the tears in my glass are forming fairly quickly and they're coming down. Okay. And then there's actually a tiny bit of staining to the glass, and that speaks to the saturation of color. All right, then on the nose. All right, wow. So that's complex, but that's complex in a completely different way from wine 3. And here, there's a range of different kinds of fruit, only here the ripeness level is totally different. Yeah, here your ripeness level is ripe and then tart and then fresh. And then a little bit of evolution too. In which case I would say there is red and black fruit primarily. And actually maybe there's a little citrus fruit. It smells like constant comment tea. We'll get to that in a second. Red fruits are, I would think, red plum again. Yeah, something like pomegranate. That is a little bit tannic and really sour red. And then there's black fruit, but it's black fruit with acid. So blackberry and black raspberry, maybe a little underripe black plum. And all of that combination is to say there is really tart and ripe, just ripe. And then fresh, pretty much fresh, but there's a little bit of development going on. Okay. I mentioned there's a little of what I would call orange peel as well. Again, reminds me of black tea and orange peel. There's a little anise quality, fennel. Oh, what else? There's mushrooms and forest flora. I'm going to get there in a second. I want to see if there's anything else. There's dark savory herbs like something like, well, tea leaf for sure, but there's bergamot and there's thyme. Almost like garigi. It's almost like Mediterranean, almost Eau de Provence, because there's a little floral, almost lavender quality to it. Okay. And there's also peppercorn. There's like green peppercorn. There's even black pepper. And that really comes up at the top of the wine. There's a little bit of floral qualities, not much. And then in terms of earth, there's, I think, earth like tern soil and the brown mushrooms I mentioned. And maybe a little bit of mineral, we'll see on the palate. The oak here is mixed. I think it's mostly used. I know there's not spice so much, but there is an oxidative quality. It's kind of like cedar, sandalwood, cigar box. Okay, and why don't we taste it, please? Ah, okay. So the black pepper, it pops up immediately. And it carries all the way through the finish. You get a lot of black pepper, green peppercorn, but black pepper. Okay, the fruit's interesting because there's like a range of ripeness. Yeah. So we do have some fairly ripe black fruit, but more tart black fruit, tart red fruit. So the wine, as so often happens in red wines, tartens up from nose to palate. All the herbal qualities. Yeah, the bergamot, the thyme, kind of like the lavender herb de Provence thing going on, and the earthiness, the potting soil, it is a little dusty minerally, almost chalky on the palate. The oak there presents itself as used, not really spicy, but more, the oxidative walnut, pecan shell, things like that. Yeah. And I taste it again for the structure. I would also say that on second taste, the fruit is fairly forward, but there's a little green stemmy quality thing going on. So I think it's partial whole cluster. The alcohol is moderate at best. This is probably 13.5. The last wine in the bottle registers 14.5, by the way. Wine 3, 14.5. I think it's higher. This is 13.5. This is straight ahead medium alcohol, medium plus acid for sure. The tannins, though, are soft, medium, just over medium. And what else? The finish that I'm left with is the earthiness, the tartar elements of the fruit, the green herbal type things, and then the black pepper. The black pepper on the finish is what's going on. Okay, finish is medium plus. I'd say this is really quite a complex wine. And yeah, that's what we have. So let's see our poll. And here we go. So it looks like we've got 3 Rhone grapes on the menu. We've got Mourvedre. That could be from France or from Spain as a Monastrell. We've got Grenache blend, which could be Garnacha or Grenache. And then finally Syrah or a blend. And your places are Spain for, well, the Garnacha and Mourvedre, Monastrell. Europe for all 3, France. And then Australia for all 3, because they make GSMs, Grenache, Shiraz, Mourvedres in the Barossa and other places. And then California, all 3. So again, pick your poison here. You've got 3 closely related grapes. I'm going to talk about how they're different structurally, because that's the way to identify them. And the fruit qualities. So everybody vote. And yeah, let's see what we have. And if you're not convinced, and Evan said this a few minutes ago, you can choose other. Okay. All right.
And if you want to pick other, be prepared to say where your other's from.
Yeah, you got to tell us.
Which is always nice. Yeah.
Well, it happened on the last one, but I couldn't get anybody to speak up. So.
Okay. Wow. So everybody's going for Syrah. Okay. That's interesting. And for a place, nobody went to Spain. Everybody's, most people in France, some in Australia, and some in California. Okay. All right. So that's very curious. I think I telegraphed the pepper thing. No, but the pepper is from rotundone, that chemical compound, and rotundone is also in Mourvedre and it's in Grenache too. Just so you know. Okay.
So it can be in all 3, right, Tim?
Yeah, it's in all 3. All right. So let's see what we have. And everybody, we're gonna get on the Learjet. We're in Italy.
And everyone probably thinks that we're ping-ponging back and forth between California or the west coast of that and that.
Yeah.
Ping pong, ping pong, ping pong, or.
And so now for something completely different.
The Veneto, and we're going to go south and west.
Australia?
To Africa.
No.
And Morocco. Right. I said, from the cyber world, I feel this silence.
I
Okay,
have I have threatened to
everybody.
use other for years now, and I used other.
Okay, yeah, I'm gonna let him talk about that in a second. So this is interesting enough. This is Anata, the North Atlantic coast. It's between the vineyards are between Rabat and Casablanca. And this is a project of the late and great Alain Graillot, who made brilliant Crozes Hermitage, put that appellation on the map. And his sons, well, actually, I should say that he found this property that was planted. The vineyards were planted in 1920 and was so enamored. He was on a cycling trip like 20 years ago, and he found it. And he thought it was such an amazing spot for a vineyard and the quality of the fruit that he invested as a partner and started this brand. And so now his two sons, Maxime and Antoine, make the wines. And this is 100% Syrah. It's fully organic. And what else about it? The vines are 25 to 30 years old. It's kind of a sandy, shale, gravelly type soil. It's aged in large cooperage, but it's kind of made in a very fruit-forward Crozes Hermitage or lighter San Josef style. To me, it's identifiably Syrah because
Well,
it's got savory
absolutely.
qualities
Mhm.
and the uneven ripening of the fruit, but also the peppery quality. But very soft tannins and frankly, surprisingly elegant and complex wine from Morocco. Who knew? So yeah, Evan, this was a find. This is
Yeah.
one.
Oh,
I
well,
put in the chat room that I bought this wine for years. It's available in a secondary market. Tim, do you mind if I ask you why not Mourvedre or Grenache? Are there any
Good question. Right, so
big?
Mourvedre
Mhm,
would be even more savory, but Mourvedre
mhm,
is tannic. You
mhm.
know, it's also more often than not rustic. This wine, I don't know about you, this is clean. This is really exceptional winemaking. Grenache should be a different color. It'd be red fruit dominant, like my description of Southern Rhone Grenache is rusted strawberries, right? So very rusted, dried strawberry jam. Certainly the peppery, the savory qualities, and yeah. But this has the range of ripening with the fruit going on. Really underripened, ripe elements. So
yeah.
yeah,
Yeah, and I think what's important to note here is this is not a gotcha wine. This is a discovery, as Madeline always likes to say. What's interesting is that it's clearly got Syrah character. It's obviously from a different place, so hence Sirocco, Syrah from Morocco. But what I like about it is there's enough that sort of shows the thread to Crozes Hermitage, to the Northern Rhone, to sort of the interpretation, the whole cluster that you point out, Tim, but it's clearly from a different climate. It's clearly from a
yeah.
different place. And I saw comments saying, how would I know this is sort of like this sort of terroir? Well, unless you have a boatload of experience trying Moroccan, Algerian, Tunisian wines, etc., clearly you're not going to have your arms grasped around what is the terroir of the area. And honestly, the lion's share of North African wines that I've had outside of a handful of muscats out of Tunisia, which can be delightfully cool, tend to be a little dirtier, tend to be a bit funkier, tend to be not as refined and not as necessarily varietally specific. There's a lot of Carignan down there for yields and stuff like that. But this is almost to me like a very Northern Rhone take, clearly in terms of the
Mm.
thinking, the esprit, but done in a different place. And that's really, if you can go out of it and just, again, blowing your brain out in the sense of, wow, there are wines made in other parts of the world, whether it's China or North Africa or other places. And it's just cool to be able to experience them and experience, what we do for you. Good
It's
examples that way.
varietally expressive. If
Hmm.
Yeah.
nothing else, you can sit there and go, gee, Syrah from the moon, where?
Yeah, and there's a
Absolutely.
family. That's the late Alain in the middle, and then the sons Maxime and Antoine.
Yeah. And again, just tip of the hat or tip of the beret to Alain. He was really one of the first people to take the
Yeah.
appellation of Crozes Hermitage seriously beyond sort of volume produced, more cooperative, volume driven wines. So fun wine. Hope you enjoyed it. And the first use of other as a category, as promised. All right, let's move
Yeah.
on, everybody, to wine number 5 and take a look at our questions there. So again, the red, blue, black thing, that's a perennial question, and I think very important in the standpoint of red wines because you simply don't have that kind of range. I mean, yeah, you have tree fruits and orchard fruits and tropical fruits, but I think it's structurally important as well as expression important in red wines. Is there any earthiness? Is it organic or inorganically driven? And then obviously, what are the tannins all about? So they tend to be very related questions as we go through red wines. I mean, I guess we could ask you about, are there 2 tons of oak on this wine or not? But, that's a fairly binary choice. These actually make you think a little bit. So as I look at the wine here, we've dropped down in color just a little bit. It's probably quite not as extracted and opaque. I can read through this, albeit needing my glasses through the wine. The color itself is sort of very, ruby pushing garnet. There's a little bit of age on here, and it fades out to a slightly more pinkish rim. As I look at the tiering and the extraction, tiers are moderate. And again, this tiering thing is all relative if your glasses aren't clean. So if you're going to play that game, make sure you have what they call beer clean glasses. We know that if you pour beer into a glass that's other than crystal clean, the head will go away. Hence the expression beer clean. You need that for wine as well if you really want to be able to see the tiers well. Mine are moderate as I go down, and my color as I swirl it around, or rather roll it around and look at it, I'm getting some soft extraction of color, which is, to be expected, I think, in a wine of this depth of color. All right. Fruit, definitely more on the sort of earthy / savory fruit side of things. Let's talk about the fruit first. A lot of red fruit here, which again suggests sort of earlier ripening type grapes. And the other thing I will tell you right off the bat, before I do this is the first wine that we've tasted that's come off to me as being blended. There's lots of different things here which suggest a range of different flavor styles and profiles, probably emanating from the fruit varieties, rather than purely this and that. So I'm getting red fruit, red currants, red plums, red cherries, not overripe, fresh and ripe, expressive, but on the more savory slide. I'm getting black fruit, tart, sort of as Tim talked about before, raspberries, black raspberries, a little bit of something different, more mulberry, which is sort of in that vein, but a little bit more savory by nature. I'm definitely getting currants in this wine, both red and black, and particularly black in that sort of cassis-ish vein of things. There's a little bit of black plum as well. The floral elements that are here are sort of in that darker vein, maybe a little bit more lavender. Herbal, for sure. Green elements, pyrozinic elements, for sure. I'm getting thyme, I'm getting bay leaf, I'm getting a little bit of tobacco leaf, both blonde and brown by nature. A little bit of pepper, although I don't think it's a dominant element of this wine. There's a little bit of kola nut. There's definitely earthiness, both in the form of sort of a mushroomy, foresty floor thing, but also almost something in a minerally, graphite-y thing. I don't know. That's the best I get it. A little bit of potting soil, as I said before. And then I don't know whether it's power of suggestion, Tim, but I'm getting a kiss of Fernet in this wine as well, too. Although I don't think it's a driving character. I think you just planted it in my brain, and it's become sort of a earworm of sorts sitting in there. A modest amount of oak. I'm definitely picking up some soft baking spice, particularly driven by clove. There's a little bit of cedar, a little cigar boxy element to it. And then in the mouth, acid, medium plus, maybe scooching a little bit high. Tannins, medium plus, pushing high for sure. But not Velcro. They're a nice genre of managed tannins. And then the ABV, probably moderate too. My chest cavity is apropos. And again, going back to the legs, that's a connection you can make within that. There's definitely a bit of astringency there. My mouth is caving in just a little bit, although once again, although the tannins I think are high, I think they're well managed and it's not astringent. My mouth isn't actually drying out, although they are present and very much at the forefront of the wine. It is long, for sure. It is complex, for sure. As I'm sitting here paying attention to not only the counting of 1 through 10, 1, 1,000, 2, 1,000 in my mouth, I'm also noting the expansiveness of the finish, is how it's literally flaring out like a peacock's tail in the back of my mouth, which suggests very strong high levels of complexity in the wine. And I keep coming back to the wine that it's sort of red and black fruit driven, both on the tart side, ripe, but not overripe, which is reflective of alcohol. There is oak here, which is clearly good pedigreed oak, but it's again framing the wine in a very subtle way. You notice that it's not like an unframed picture, that there's a frame picture on it, but your brain isn't immediately drawn to the frame and looking at the frame and not at the picture that it's actually framing there. And definitely a lot of earthiness there. So the FEW, my E is my popping letter within it, and great length, great pedigree, great complexity. So let's go ahead and see what our choices can be as far as fruit goes. We have Syrah or Syrah as a blend. Think about this wine in the context of the Syrah that we just came off of. Would it be beyond Evan to give you two Syrahs in the same flight? Absolutely not. I could do that, but think about how this wine shares with the last wine. We have Sangiovese, or could actually be a Sangiovese blend, and that's what you would find in Tuscany. Although you do find Sangiovese in other parts of the world, that's really associated with central Italy more than anything else, Tuscany and surrounding areas. Think about what Chiantis are like. Think about what Brunellas are like. Think about what Bulgari wines could be like, etc. We have Carmenere in a blend. Carmenere most associated with Chile, and although grown in Bordeaux and other places too. And then, of course, other. Would I give you two others in a row? Who knows? What are your associations? Italy, clearly for Sangiovese. There's actually a little bit of Carmenere there, and there are some Syrahs grown in Tuscany, oftentimes blended, I might add, with Sangiovese. France, a Syrah blend and Carmenere blend, depending on where you were. Argentina could certainly be Syrah for sure. And Argentina, of course, could be Sangiovese. We don't think about it much, but it's a grape that I've seen there a little bit playing around, and not so much Carmenere. That's more our friends in Chile, which is the choice down there, which is really dominated there. There's some very good Syrah in Chile as well. So think about that, vote often and all that, and think about where it could be. I like the fact that people are engaged today. That's always a lot of fun. And again, I think what's nice is you're coming off of now 4 prior wines, so and 2 reds within that. So think about how those stand side by side there and how that might color, no pun intended, your choice of grape. So with that, we're going to bring the poll to a close in 3, 2, 1. And our results are as follows. Well, it looks like Sangiovese is winning here, followed by Carmenere as a blend, and followed by that. So that's curious. And Italy is leading there. But let's go ahead and see what we have. And I'm actually curious, and I'll have to go back and look at my own notes later. So I'm wondering if this poll, which would be my fault, by the way, is paralleling
I think
what
there's
this
an
wine
issue with
is.
the poll.
I think there is too. So let's not tell everybody to forget the poll and ignore all of your hard work. But if you were having a hard time with it and you thought it might be something else like Jerry did, let me rest assured that this is why you should always trust yourself. Don't trust Evan, trust yourself. So let's get on a plane and see where we go. So we're going to be leaving Africa, leaving Morocco, which, by the way, is an extraordinary place, incredible food, incredible culture, incredible people, I might add, too. But we're going to find ourselves not moving that far. We're going to hop simply back over Gibraltar. We're going to go back over Spain, and we're going to go back to, yes, France. So unless Italy has become part of France and we're back in the times of the Medicis and all that wonderful stuff, we would do that now. So for all of you who are feeling relief, and for Jerry, who I know is probably doing cartwheels in his living room right now for having picked up a wine, despite what somebody might tell you, this is a wonderful exercise in trusting your palate. This is indeed a Bordeaux. It is coming from the left bank, and it is a classic styled wine coming from the subzone of Margaux. And Margaux, for those of you who are fans of the overall Greater Medoc Peninsula, is at the far south of the peninsula before you hit Bordeaux and the Grave area. And it is a really wonderful expression of Bordeaux, not only in terms of sort of the character of the fruit and all that, but also in terms of the tannin structure. This is a really neat property. The property is called Chante Lune, which literally means sing to the moon. And the name comes from the former owner, who was actually a carpenter by trade, and had his whole thinking was that when you were cutting down trees for the wood to make furniture, that you should always cut at nighttime, and most specifically as close to midnight, because that's when the wood was quote unquote at its best. Now, whether it has to do with sap content and stuff, I have no idea. but hence picking by moonlight was his theme. Singing to the moon was his theme as well, and hence Chanteloun is what the name of the property is. It literally sits on the highest hill in Bordeaux, and that's not very high. Bordeaux doesn't get very high, it undulates there, and it even then undulates low, but it is the highest peak of that. The gentleman who owns this property is a gentleman named José Soffin. He is probably most well known not for Chanteloun, which is his baby passion project that he's had for years. It produces not that much wine, but really good wine, I think that you'll agree. But he's primarily known as being the managing director of Chateau Frontenac Brown, which is also sitting in Margaux too, and is a great estate with incredible longevity. He also owns a little property in the Haut-Médoc called the Chateau du Moulin, which does a good job. And clearly, he is both a managing director with winemaking skills. He actually makes the wines for Chanteloun and for Chanteloup and Chanteloun. I guess they're both Chants, right? Chateau de Moulin rather, and Chanteloun. I think this is a real textbook example of Margaux, particularly when you're looking at the more savory nature of the fruit, the sort of matte print as opposed to glossy print element of the fruit, and then sort of the way the tannins are managed. You don't get these excessively hard, astringent tannins in Margaux. The tannins are more almost onomatopoetic. Margaux kind of rolls off the tongue as opposed to Saint-Estèphe, which doesn't roll off the tongue. And the tannins, I think, are reflective of the styles there. Average vine age on these wines is about 40 years of age. And it shows what I really like about it is it's a very intense wine without being overpowering. And I think that's very, again, classic of what Margaux is all about. They're deep and they're full, but they don't kind of like overwhelm you, overpower you. They're never certainly bombastic by nature. And you drink a wine like this, I don't know, a friend of mine once said they make you smile. Good Margaux makes you smile. And I find this wine does that too. So
I think you can memorize this nose. I really
yeah.
do. You know, if you are struggling at all with Bordeaux, to me, it's quite classic in the elements of you know, cedars, cigar box, forest floor, black and red raspberry fruit, oak, which doesn't dominate, but it, you know, that vanilla and spice is beautifully integrated. So I'm reading Bill's comment. This is memorizable. Tim, would you agree with that? It's a good expression. No matter what we did with the polls, it tells the story in the glass.
Yeah, it really does. I mean, it's the red and black currant, it's the violet floral, there's this gravelly, earthy note, and the green quality. Yeah, it's spot on for what it is. And actually delicious wine.
Yeah.
And you know, I'm going to make a comment on the vintage because I work for a retailer and we sell, oh, now that's a glamour shot of Jose Sampin. But you know, 17 is kind of like 14 in that it produced a lot of really good wine, but irregular. It wasn't an easy vintage, but you know, it's in the glass. This is very good wine. So this is not like 13. This is not a vintage you write off. You just buy carefully, which evidently Evan did.
Thank you, Madeline. And anyway, I am so pleased that you guys all, many of you, rose above me. And even though I guess that was kind of like rather than me giving you wines and you picking other, and the wine being another, this is us giving you choices and you going, it's other because it's really not the choice that you made and picking the right wine. And I'm so pleased that so many of you ended up on the right track. So bravo. And with that, Madeline, you got 15 minutes.
I don't know what to do with 15. We should sing a song or play a game or something like that, you know? So depth and hue of color suggest in this wine. And I mean, you know, Tim actually addressed this with one of the wines, but before I even mention the other questions, just look at it. Talk about telling a story. It is fully and completely opaque. I can't even see my finger moving, right? If it's ruby, it's black ruby, right? Purple in the center. And there's no gradation of color. Actually, there's no gradation, but there's not even a hue lift until you get to within like a tenth of the rim, where it just lightens and it ends up with violet. So everything about this color is connoting youth and also simple. I love simple. You know, thicker skin, probably smaller berries, whether it's a monovarietal or not. We're not talking, you know, twice the size and translucent red grape. And, you know, you can't get more enthusiastic stain than this. We're going to discuss primary non-fruit aromas, and then the intensity and the quality of the tannins, which I think is both of those tell a story, a specific non-fruit aroma, and how the tannins feel on this wine are telling. It's part of the whole deductive thing. So as it moves in the glass, it like swirls slowly. So it's giving us what? Extract and alcohol. The tears are thick and slow and stained. Again, alcohol and extract. You can get tears like that, by the way, in sweet wines, but that's not the case here. Evan's not doing that to us, giving us an opaque, sweet red at the end. That would be me. Aromatically, it is distinctive, it is clear, and it is a beautiful expression to me of a combination almost perfectly balanced of perfectly ripe black fruit and blue fruit. I don't often smell blue fruit in wines, but it's here. Blueberry. I'm not personally familiar with boysenberry, but I would say, blackberry, perfectly ripe. I don't smell anything dried in this. Black currant, cassis, but I'm just toggling back to blue. And then sort of sprouting from the inside of all that fruit is this beautiful floral characteristic that's fresh, not dried. Unlike a couple of the other wines that we experienced, we've got fresh. If I had to put my finger on it, I'm not the camp that says red flowers or, blue flowers. I say specific flowers. And I think this is all about violets, but it's more expressive than that. It's lavender too. I love lavender, fresh lavender. So floral, black and blue fruit. If there are other elements, there's a dark green characteristic. I wouldn't really call it pyrazine. If it is, it's just a whisper. It's not driving this wine in the least. There is a sense of inorganic earth in this wine. And also there's a sense of alcohol. I can feel it. It's coming across like minty or cool. I can imagine it in my chest before I even get it on the palate. Oak-wise too, there's certainly a chunk of new oak on this wine, but the wine can handle it. Absolutely no problem. They could probably cut it down. They chose not to, but there's plenty of fruit to handle that combination of vanilla and what I call the Starbucks smell of a combination of coffee and cocoa. I'm going to go ahead and take it on my palate. I get licorice in this wine too, like black licorice, but the dominant elements that are driving the aromatics to me are that combination of blue and black fruit, perfectly ripe, fresh flowers, inorganic earth, and new oak, and alcohol on the palate. I came to the Temple of Mid-Palate late in tasting life, and the attack, which is the first approach, absolutely, mirrors what I'm smelling, but there's a structure, right? Mouth-watering acidity, a surprise. Alcohol ain't medium. It's medium plus, verging on high. It pulls my attention, but it works in this wine because it's a big wine. If I had to put a number on it, and I'm not good at that, but I'd say 14-ish. The tannin is very interesting. It is, medium plus, but finely grained. It doesn't interfere with the flavor of the wine at all. The flavor actually comes out, the mouthfeel actually comes off round, but what's interesting to me is this length that is mouth-watering. So hold the thought for a minute. We've got a combination of higher alcohol and mouth-watering acidity, which could come from what? The grapes are getting very ripe, or not overripe, perfectly ripe, but there's something that's maintaining the acidity in this wine that could be, drum roll, diurnal swings. This is not uncommon in big reds, where you get plenty of alcohol, plenty of ripeness, but then when you've got 40 to 50 degrees Fahrenheit difference between daytime and nighttime temperatures, the grapes just love that. I'm going to go back to it and talk about the mid-palate again. I swallowed a little because I'm in Detroit, but I'm not driving anywhere tonight. This is positively delicious. Mid-palate is when you hold it on the palate and you stop chewing it, and I just get this plum wine of gorgeous fruit. That is, again, on the palate, it's blue and black, inching closer to black, and the well-mannered, albeit drying tannins match that black fruit. Other elements, it's not what I would call a complex wine, but I'm getting inorganic minerality for sure. There's a rockiness to this, a little bit of turned dirt, but I'm gonna toggle back to the licorice, black licorice, maybe a little bit of anise. When they get around to getting a word in edgewise, Tim and Evan can tell me I'm wrong about the pyrazine thing, but I don't really get a lot of bell pepper in this wine, just a kiss. Dark greens, a little bit of pleasant bitterness from dark greens. I eat a lot of that category of greens. And the length is extended thanks to the fruit, but also the acidity. So the big picture takeaway for me is black and blue fruit, perfectly ripe, surprising acidity levels, plenty of tannin, but well-mannered, as I mentioned. So I wouldn't call them hard. There's a roundness to this wine, a distinct florality to this wine. When you put your nose in the glass, that's just gorgeous. Lavender and violets. Inorganic earth for sure, new oak for sure, and it's got to be French. It's very classic smelling and long, high quality, young. Not, I wouldn't say there's well, I'm not going to say there. We're going to see what our options are in the beloved whole, and I'm going to take a good look at this. Okay. Tempranillo, Merlot, Malbec. So we've got two Bordelaise varieties. And this is what I want to say right up front about this, is that especially those of you who are taking anything in the MS universe, including certified, the whole issue of Cabernet versus Merlot versus Malbec versus Cab Franc, it's not that confusing. They all have big strokes to them that define the grape. And if you haven't picked up Tim's book, Message in the Bottle, it's worth the weight of admission just to read the varietal profiles, because he gives you ID keys. So Merlot and Malbec, Bordelaise varieties. I would say Merlot tends to have more red fruit and a little bit more of an herbal element. Malbec certainly can be opaque in color and combine black and blue fruit with smooth tannins and florals. And Tempranillo is going to have a combo of red and black fruit, probably scooching closer to red but dried, and a dominant oxidative character that comes from, extended periods of time. And I don't mean that as a character flaw, it just is in barrel, particularly if we're moving into Reserva and Grand Reserva land. So, more aerobic influence than anaerobic. So Spain, France, Argentina, California, and other. It's not Greek, I'm telling you. It's not from Nausa or Nemea.
Awesome. Well, vote everybody. It's our last wine of the day. And hopefully we'll
Tim's
have some
nodding.
fun
Does
with
that
it.
mean you like it? I think it's beautiful wine.
Yeah, no. Great depth, incredible depth on this one. So it looks like you Malbec's lead and Argentina leads.
And you are, and those folks who said other, both in the grape variety and the country, do you mind defining? Because it just makes it a lot more fun for us. But we are getting on the plane, and because we are within a stone's throw of our happy half hour, I'm going to reveal it before we get there. This is indeed Argentine Malbec. We're leaving Bordeaux and we're crossing the ocean again. It's a little bit of a dizzying day, Evan, in terms of where we're going.
Absolutely. But the great irony, and of course the thread between Bordeaux and Argentina these days is a lot of the pre-phylloxera original plant materials for Bordelais varieties, in the case of Argentina with Malbec, in the case of Chile with Carmenere, are now being brought back to France to repropagate.
Yes.
So that's
and
kind of
actually,
cool.
specifically, we are, by the way, in Valle de Uco. We are in the sub-district La Consulta, so we're talking about an expression of Malbec that's intense, right? with the strong minerality. The acidity makes perfect sense here. We are on a good day, at least at 3,000 feet above sea level. I just love meditating on those altitudes. You know, Napa brags when they can get up above 2,000. This is family owned and operated, relatively new, well, 1999, so 26 years. This is a Lebanese family that actually pioneered this region, Uco and specifically La Consulta. It's called Alto Cedro, which is a beautiful name. It means high cedar. And those of you who have been, you know, to the Mediterranean and this specific corner of it, and in Greece also, cedar trees are a big deal. They're beloved. This wine has seen interesting winemaking technique. They use very old concrete fermentation tanks, and they are happy to tell you that they do 4 pump overs a day. So they're going for, you know, extraction. And they also use partial whole berry fermentation, which I didn't pick up, but one of my colleagues might have. You know, when a wine is this concentrated, oh, I love this shot. I always think when you see pictures of Argentine vineyards, it's like, who can do this? It's like a glamour tourist shot, but it's real. I mean, it's so cool having been there. It's high desert and you see cactus in the vineyards. And the Uco Valley is actually, you know, tucked up closer to the mountains than some other areas. And, you know, their starting altitude is very high and it's at the southern end of the Mendoza range. It is aged actually in a combination of different French oak barrels. So the fermentation takes place in concrete, and then the aging takes place in classic small French oak, different mix of old and new. It is over 14% alcohol by volume. And just talking about Malbec real quick, and then I'll hand it over to you, Evan. What kills me in a good way about Argentine Malbec, this is almost an overnight classic. I mean, it is recognizable in blind tastings. There's the handsome Lebanese gentleman, Karim Moussi Safi. Somebody mentioned clonal variation. Evan did, and it is happily susceptible to quite a bit of diversity. And what's interesting happening in Cahors right now is they're planting clones that have been very successful in Argentina, and over 70% of Cahors is now referred to as Malbec on the French labels. And this is a grape variety that came home in the late 1800s to Argentina. And not only do you have the altitude with high intense ultraviolet light going for the concentration of color and also alcohol, but you have tighter bunches and smaller berries than you do from the Côte in southwestern France. I just think this is a beautifully memorizable Malbec with that combination of blue fruit pushing forward, the violets and lavender, the oak, the alcohol, the quality of the tannins. Do you guys agree?
Yeah, I just have to say this is really a hell of a bottle of wine for $25. You know, I mean, I can't.
25, is that
it's
true?
Queen's type. It's just such good winemaking.
Wow.
Undeniably Malbec, Argentine Malbec, and just silky, refined, elegant, and delicious more than anything.
Yeah. And old vine and so all. Yeah, I mean the value for quality here is exceptional. Couple of thoughts before we move on. One, you know, I think as Madeline pointed out, when you get that level of depth and profundity in a wine, yet you have that acid there. You know, this is really not only classic Malbec, but it's classic Uco Valley too, in the sense
High
that if you were to
altitude.
move high altitude,
Right.
but if you move closer to Mendoza City, closer to Agrello, closer to Maipú, places like that, the wines tend to have more generosity, more of a what would you call it, a muffin top, to use a body shape around them, as opposed to the leanness that you get. Again,
power,
purely
right?
the power that you get there. I didn't want to scare you off, Madeline, but Karim is actually in our audience today, and hopefully will join us for the happy half hour afterwards.
Oh,
And
Karim, I hope I represented your
I'm
wine
sure, I know you did.
well.
I know
I
you did.
loved it.
Hopefully he'll join us. But anyway, with that, a fun sextet of wines, a couple of thoughts before we move into the happy half hour. Number one, we will be having our next webinar on December 13th. So pre-Christmas and end of year and Hanukkah, I guess kind of Hanukkah-ish and all that holidays. So that will be Kit 161A. There's some really fun stuff in 161A, as you would imagine, as we approach the holidays. Secondarily, it's not on the link here, but if you do go to the MTW homepage and you go up into the upper right-hand corner, we do have the first elements of our 2024 gift guide. Hopefully it'll be completely fully loaded by Black Friday, but if not, for the holidays, for those of you who are thinking about some fun stuff and any gifting that you want to do. And with that, I also want to make note very happily that not one, not two, but I understand two others potentially coming down the road. We have a prolific author in our midst who is Tim Gaiser, and as Madeline has referenced and I have referenced many times. Not only has Message in the Bottle become quickly an absolute de rigueur shelf placement for all of you who love wine and understanding, learning, discernment, strategies around tasting, etc. But he's got a new book out called Strong Water, which is literally launching as we speak. And Tim, you want to give us a few words about it?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, thanks, Evan. So it's a collection of essays. Everybody, Message in the Bottle was an academic text, and it's pretty dense. This is a collection of essays, as the book implies, on food, wine, and restaurants. It's a fun read. It's funny. It's snarky. Yeah. Madeline has read a lot of it. She wrote into the book. Yeah, it's about working. First job in a pancake house. It's tragic stories in showers on the road. It's scary moments in cars on wine trips. But there's also a middle section on wine that has some pretty weighty stuff, but it's meant to be light, entertaining, and funny. And I think it's a good read. So it's available on Kindle right now. The soft cover will come out on Amazon mid next week, probably Wednesday. So check it out because it's a good read.
Awesome. And that soft cover sounds like a perfect holiday gift or a stocking stuffer if the book's not too big, for people who like quick, fun reads and all that too. And we're so excited to help promote it here with you, Tim. So with that, everybody, we're going to bring the official webinar to a close, and we are going to enter into our